Hello and welcome along to this UCAS International podcast with me, Robbie James. And on today's episode, we are talking all things money. We're talking finance, budgeting. We're going to get scholarships in there as well. So all about how you can manage your money when you come to study in the UK. And we are going to do that with the wonderful Catriona McCarthy, who is Global Head of Student Mobility and Internationalisation of UK Education at the British Council. It's good to see you, Catriona. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Robbie.
And we're also joined as well by brilliant Arya Güneş as well, who is a student at the Royal Academy of Music. That is a cool title, Arya. Royal Academy of Music. What's your instrument of choice?
I play the cello.
Oh, very good. Difficult though. You got to quite a big instrument, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it is heavy to carry a lot of the times.
Do you get that on the tube?
Yes,
Yeah.
sometimes I have to, but I got used to it because I've been playing for 10 years. So one way or another, you just have to deal with it.
It's tough. It's tough being those cello players. You didn't think to bring it to the podcast?
No, unfortunately, no. I didn't bring it today.
That's fine. Like we could have had a jam session. Me on the drums, Catriona, instrument.
Played a little of the classical flute as a youngster. Yeah.
Did you now?
No, it wasn't very good.
Okay. Oh, well. Well, what we'll focus on is the things you are good at, things like scholarships and budgeting and serious stuff.
Mm-hmm. Very serious.
Let's get into it then. Lots to cover in today's podcast. Shall we start with the costs associated with studying in the UK? Catriona, maybe we'll come to you first on this. What are, obviously, tuition fees being the main one, but what other costs do the students have to think about when coming here?
Yeah, so I suppose, for every student starting out at university, they need to think about some of the core things that include your tuition, also your accommodation costs, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but dependent on where you choose to live, there will often be varying accommodation costs. Things like food and utilities, really essential. Socialising, equally as essential, another part of budgeting there. But I guess for international students, there are also some very distinct costs in there as well. So thinking about things like, additional moving costs, perhaps a little bit more on your luggage allowance as you travel to the UK. And things like, health surcharges and so on. So there are a few more add-on costs for international students that are quite distinct.
You were nodding away there, Arya. Did you get any? Was it a surprise when you suddenly found out? Oh yeah, I've got to pay for that. Oh yeah, and that.
Yeah, the NHS surcharge was a big surprise. I think for my parents as well, because I believe my undergraduate course is 4 years, so I had to pay for 4 years, and I think the yearly cost is now £776, something like that, and that is on top of the visa application fees. And if you're doing a priority, or I think there's a super priority visa application, so depending on that, you can either also pay £500 or £1,000 extra. So there's a lot of costs to think about for international students specifically.
Is it daunting? How did you sort of cope with that initial phase of being like, oh, okay, this is real adulthood?
Yeah, definitely. It was kind of overwhelming, and with my parents also, we had to make a very specific plan about how we were going to cover everything. And also we asked some of our friends for help as well. And yeah, it is something that you don't really expect in the beginning, I suppose.
And you mentioned, Catriona, that actually where you study can have a big impact on the kind of costs associated. Just go into a bit more detail with that if you can.
Yeah, I mean, the UK higher education sector is hugely diverse, and there are institutions located in each of the UK's regions. So we've got England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. As with any other country in the world, capital cities and sort of tier one cities will tend to be a little bit more expensive. And then, of course, places in some of the regions or perhaps more rural areas are likely to be less expensive. I think it's important to remember that costs are also relative. So you may have come from living in quite an expensive capital city, and so therefore moving to another one in the UK may not seem that much of a jump financially for you. But for other students, that might not be the case. So it's really important to do your research around things like living expenses. I suppose the flip side to that is that, you might choose to live in perhaps a more expensive capital city. But then because it's a busy place, there is also more access to things like part-time jobs. You may find actually that you live in closer proximity to your university campus, and so your travel costs might not be as substantial. And so it's always important to look at these things on balance. So there's the sort of cost of living, but think about the sort of system around it and how you might seek to balance some of your costs.
So where are we looking to try and get that information? Was there anywhere particular, Arya, that you went to? Any kind of hubs that you looked out to try and find more information?
I mean, for us, it was quite easy because my school is part of the University of London, and we received a lot of information from the University of London around different student houses that we could consider for accommodation. If we were to consider a shared flat or something like that, then maybe the possible costs that we would need to think about as well. My school also sent us from the Students' Union, we got sent an outline of possible costs in London just in general. They told us that we should be prepared to put about £12,000 per year into accommodation, for example, because London is not very cheap. So yeah, I think for me it was quite easy because my university did definitely give us some options in that sense and helped us kind of calculate how we were going to approach everything.
And looking back on it, was there anything that you would have maybe done differently, or anything that you would encourage students to do now when considering their options?
I think definitely do research. There are a lot of online platforms where you can find information on this. There, if you know any students that do currently study in the UK, don't be afraid to reach out and ask questions. I think that's the main thing for international students in general. Don't be afraid to ask questions because people here, they're here to help you. Everybody is willing to help you as well. I think that there are a lot of people who have been in this position before and they are definitely willing to give a helping hand. I would also maybe be very careful with budgeting, and I would be very careful with doing things in advance. So not leaving things to the last minute because the cost is going to vary depending on whether or not, for example, you get your accommodation fixed a few months prior, or if you do something last minute. I've been in that situation last year where I did get lucky because I was able to take over somebody's tenancy at a student accommodation, but I sort of left it to the last minute and then it was very stressful. So cost-wise, I would really think about that. Planning everything in advance, I think, is important.
You were nodding away with approval there, Catriona.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like Arya is taking exactly the right approach. I think accessing the sources of information that are available. Universities have a responsibility to be transparent and honest in the information that they provide to potential students. And so estimations of living costs are generally, quite good. You know, I've often met students who have a propensity to sort of think, well, you've said it's going to cost this much, but if I'm really careful, I can spend a little bit less. But I think that sort of approach will tend to put students under financial pressure in the longer term. And so, be conscious of the advice that universities give you. It is usually honest and sensible, and it's the right way to approach things. And absolutely, planning is essential. And, thinking very carefully about your expenditure, balancing your money, I think, on a monthly basis is really important. You know, very often for international students in particular, they will arrive with more money in their bank accounts than they have ever had before, because often you will have a lump sum in your account that you've needed to demonstrate to UK visas and immigration in order to secure your sponsorship. But that's not a resource for you to spend all at once.
The freedom!
So, don't be drawn in by the shopping and the travel and the tourism and all of the amazing things that you can do. So it's really important, as Arya said, to kind of plan and budget wisely.
And Arya, you mentioned that you were kind of in quite a nice position where you could take over a tenancy. There are quite a lot of accommodation options, right? So were you trying to also do some sifting through to see what potential avenues there might be?
Yeah, so obviously the first option is if your university has a student hall, that's definitely an option. But sometimes from what I hear from friends, because my university unfortunately doesn't have its own accommodation, they can be quite expensive. So a lot of people do look to other options. There are independent student halls as well. So for example, I'm currently living in the International Students House in London, which is affiliated with...
That sounds fancy. International Students House in London.
Yeah, it's a very nice place, and they actually have several other locations. I think they're based in New York, if I'm not wrong.
Again,
But
fancy.
yeah, but the prices are very affordable, and they are affiliated with several schools in London and that are also part of the University of London. Aside from that, I last year, when I mentioned that I took over somebody's tenancy, that was also in a student's hall, and yeah, so those are some options. Apart from that, obviously, if you have a shared flat, that's definitely an option. You need to think about bills and utilities in that case, because for student halls, usually that expense is already covered within the monthly payment that you make. But apart from that, one option I think several of my friends are doing this is when you can live with somebody, let's say an elderly person that might need some help with, let's say, daily tasks like groceries or cleaning things, cooking, and then they will give you a very reduced fee for accommodation. So you can live with them in a flat or a house, and as long as you're helping out with these things. So in exchange for that, you can also get a reduced fee on that, because I have several friends that are doing this, and they find it very helpful as well. So that's an option for London, definitely, because it tends to be very expensive. I have a friend, for example, she pays, I believe, £400 a month, which is unheard of for London, but she's doing this in exchange for helping an elderly lady who owns the house with, like I said, some of her daily tasks. So those are some options that one can consider, definitely.
It's an amazing thing. I've never heard of that. That's cool. You're helping someone out and you're getting some decent rent. Very good indeed. So we've covered costs. If we move it on to how to save money, right at the very start, Catriona, one option to save money is to get yourself a scholarship. Now, how do they work in the UK?
Yeah, so I suppose scholarships, bursaries, incentives, there are lots of different ways of looking at this, but I suppose it is important that students are able to access information where they can gather summaries of the sorts of scholarships that are available more broadly, but also perhaps scholarships that are more unique to your institution or to your discipline of study. And one source of information that I would point out is the search engine on the British Council Study UK site, where you're able to submit criteria, location, institution, course of study, and that will give you a list of scholarships that are available. And so I know for many students, the availability of scholarships will play a really key role in determining their subject choice and which institution they study at. And so it is very important to look at that as an option. I suppose, though, large-scale scholarships, so full fee scholarships, are few and far between, relatively speaking. And many students will be looking at paying primarily their own way, but some sort of scholarship that might help them on a year-to-year basis. And that could be things like a £1,000 or £2,000 fee reduction, which actually, you know, over a 3 or 4 year degree makes a really big difference. Some institutions will offer things like accommodation scholarships or partial accommodation scholarships because, you know, I think as Arya mentioned, she attends an institution that doesn't have its own halls of residence. The vast majority of UK universities do have halls of residence that students can access, either through those that are privately owned by the university or in partnership with a provider. And so often you will see that there are scholarships available for accommodation as well. Often students can also access sources of funding based on things like academic excellence in year. And so, you know, certainly at the stage when you're applying to university, you're looking at those scholarships that are upfront. But do keep an eye out when you are a student, because if you're, you know, doing really well, there are merit-based scholarships that you can sort of get during the year.
Oh, so they're actually like a current scholarship done.
Yeah, and so, I mean, they're not uniformly available, but, you know, if you're doing well at your studies, it's really important to seek out any additional sources of funding. And again, most universities will have sort of scholarships and finance teams within the institutions who can point you towards those sources of funding as well. But certainly the Study UK search tool is a really good place to start when you're applying.
Yeah, there are so many options, aren't there? And it's well worth people having a look and seeing what scholarships might be available. Loads of resources, don't forget, available at ucas.com/international. You mentioned the all-important word, Arya, budgeting earlier on. What kind of steps do you take to try and make sure that you save, even if it's just a little bit of money a day or a week, right? It can all build up.
the first thing you have to do, or the main thing you have to do, is definitely making a budget plan. And I know that this is very basic advice, but I think it's very important to highlight it, because a lot of students skip this step, and then they end up spending a lot of money.
It can sound quite daunting, can't it,
Yes.
budgeting? You think spreadsheets, and then you sort of, oh my goodness, so much.
But it doesn't have to be anything like that. So, for example, I use online banking, and what you can do in online banking is sometimes in your bank account, for example, you can make little folders saying, for example, I have one for groceries, one for utilities, let's say, one for shopping, one for travel, and then I can put the amount of money that I am willing to spend on this monthly, so that I keep, for example, spending money on this, and then I get an alert when I reach the target that I wanted. Then I have to rethink, okay, then how can I distribute this better the next month? That's a very simple way of doing that, for example. But if it's easier for you, you can also just make a list. You can make a list on your notes app, but it's easier to put something beforehand saying, okay, this is the amount of money that I'm going to spend on this week. Maybe consider, for example, let's say if it's food, how can I budget this? If a meal deal is this much, then how many of these can I get for a week, depending on the cost that I put as a target on my list, and so on and so forth. It doesn't have to be something that is overwhelming or daunting. It can be just as simple as putting something on your phone and let's say pinning that on your phone so that you can look at it every day and remind yourself, okay, this is the amount of money that I can spend on this. And yeah, it can be as simple as that.
And actually, if I can just add, you're clearly acing the budget planning, but for other students it can be quite challenging, especially in the first year of study. And so lots of UK universities actually have workshops for new students around financial management, so that they can help you develop those good practices from a very early stage. So it's really worth checking in with support services within universities, because they can help you get to this sort of, really good practice space.
Help you get to Arya's level.
Absolutely, yeah.
And also things like picking up a bit of part-time work. I know student life is busy, but that also, Catriona, is something to consider, to maybe just earn a little bit of money on the side.
Absolutely. So, sponsored international students, so students who are here on a visa, are able to work up to normally a threshold of about 20 hours per week during term time, and then more extended work hours during holiday periods. And remember that what's teaching time and what's holiday time is prescribed by the university, so you've got to follow your academic timetable in that regard. And those are for degree level programs. There are different rules for those that are perhaps on foundation or diploma, so slightly more restricted working regulations. But part-time work is brilliant, as you say, to help bolster your finances. But it's also a really good way of, making friends, improving your sort of social connections in the local area. So it's good for money reasons, but for language skills, for social networks, for all of those things, it's a really good thing to do. I would say though, for students who are coming to the UK, study is challenging. And it's really important that you get your academic balance right first, and then think carefully about what you can manage beyond that in relation to part-time work, because if one competes against the other and your academics slip, then that's not really where you want to be.
Like you said, it's all about the keyword balance, isn't it, there? And there are other sort of little hacks, right, Arya, that you can find, things like, rail cards and student discounts and various other kind of incentives around the UK to try and ease the burden a little bit.
Yeah, I would say definitely get a rail card. That has been something that I did that I didn't think that I was going to.
How do they work, rail cards?
So you can just apply online. I believe you can get an online copy, but I got a physical copy, which arrived in a few days. It's very simple if you just go on online, the UK, online on the UK transport website probably.
Sure.
But I got it when I first arrived in the UK, and basically what it does is, if you're, let's say, using the National Rail, you're taking a train anywhere. So this doesn't work within London with the Underground, but if you're taking, like I said, a National Rail train, it will give you a discount. So one way you can definitely save is, if you're going from your university, wherever you're studying, to the airport, whenever outside of term time you're going home, So the fees tend to be lower if you have a, let's say, 16 to 25 rail card. That has been very useful to me because I tend to go home when it's outside of term time, and I didn't realize that it would save me that much money, but it usually is, I think, almost a 50% discount. It's a very big discount, and that is very helpful. So definitely do that. It's very simple to do. Aside from that, if you're living in London, you can also get a student Oyster card. So I don't usually take the tube because I'm very lucky and my accommodation's 5 minutes.
And you've also got a cello to lug around.
Yeah, also. But apart from that, I live 5 minutes from my school, so I can just walk. But for people that do have to take the tube on a daily basis, I think a student Oyster card is very useful as well, because I believe there are some discounts that come with that. Transport is a big thing in London in general, because I believe London now has the most expensive transportation system in the world, if I'm not wrong, because I read something about them a few days ago and I was flabbergasted, to put it that way. But yeah, I think that's a very big way to spend to save money. And then aside from that, cooking at home is definitely helpful. I know that wherever you go, in terms of groceries, London is very expensive anyway, but that also kind of plays into the budgeting plan. So if you're, let's say, putting a certain amount of money in groceries, and then you can think about, okay, what ingredients am I able to buy, and what kind of affordable but also nutritious meals I can make with that. If you're not able to cook, sometimes you just have to get a meal deal. If you can get, let's say, a club card or something like that from grocery stores, that's also very useful, because it also gives you discounts.
Like a loyalty card
yes,
type
loyalty
thing,
cards. Yeah, loyalty cards. If you can get a loyalty card, that's very useful. And you can also accumulate points on that. So sometimes they will give you a voucher after a certain amount of purchases. I think those are the main things in general.
And this is the thing, isn't it? This is where knowing where you're going to be is so important, because prices will vary around the UK, whether you're in London, whether you're up in Scotland, north of England, Northern Ireland, wherever it might be, prices will vary.
They do. And look, I think, to Arya's point, in any location where there is a university and where you have students, the environment around that university will tailor some of its services, its catering, its transport options to students, because everyone recognises that being a student is a time during your life when you're fairly financially stretched. You're not at full earning capacity, you're committing to studies. And so you will find things that rail travel can be accessed on a reduced basis for students. If you're in places like Northern Ireland or in Scotland, perhaps where rail travel is not so prevalent, bus services will be cheaper. Often universities will have connection services between campus and the city, and sometimes those are actually free. So look into that as well.
We love free stuff.
We do.
Give me the free stuff.
And I think being careful about where you shop. One of the really interesting things, I don't know if you found this when you came to the UK, is that there are almost different types of supermarkets that cater to different levels of wealth, I would say.
Yes,
and so
definitely.
there are supermarkets that are perhaps much more expensive, have sort of luxury goods in there, and then you have supermarkets that are much cheaper. And so it's really important to think about where you do your shopping if you're in self-catered accommodation. And I guess the flip side to that is if you're in student halls of residence. I know, Arya, you said a little bit earlier that halls can be expensive. But it's also important to look beneath the headline price, because within halls of residence, you've got your utilities in there. So you don't have to pay for heating or electricity or Wi-Fi. Sometimes you'll have social and common rooms. Some even have gyms within them. And then on top of that, you can go perhaps for catered options as well. And so for lots of students, when they come to the UK, particularly in their first year, halls of residence can offer a really good option, because they're located in an area that you can be reassured of as being safe, in good proximity to campus. It's a really good way to meet people.
Yeah, definitely.
And you know what you're paying up front. And generally we find then that lots of students, when they've made their connections and you've got a bunch of friends, that's when you'll sort of brave into the private sector for undergraduates in particular. And you can take out a lease with your friends and home cook and share meals and do all of those great things.
You know what I really enjoyed there was your diplomatic response about supermarkets and which ones are available.
I know.
You did very well not to get any brands in there as well. That was very, very good stuff. The BBC would be delighted with your response there. Good stuff. Arya, looking back at sort of your time in the UK so far, is there anything you would have told your younger self, maybe, be aware of that, or I should have done that a bit better when it comes to budgeting and finance?
I think definitely planning. So right now, because I sort of talked about how important it is to make a budget plan, the reason why is because in my first year, I didn't do that. And it was definitely harder. Sometimes I would check my bank account and I was like, oh my God, where did all the money go all of a sudden? And
It's amazing how quickly money disappears, isn't it, when you're an adult?
Yes, definitely. And it was obviously my first dive into adulthood, let's say. So I was sort of very inexperienced in managing my own finances. Definitely, I think there are certain things that I'm happy with how I did them. So, for example, getting part-time work actually has been very useful for me. I think to touch on the 20-hour limit for students, specifically the students that are on a Tier 4 visa, I believe, that is actually a very useful threshold to have because of kind of what you said, Catriona, about balancing your studies also with the part-time work. And it's really good to get experience, to do some networking. If you've never worked before, it's just really nice to experience that kind of environment, see what you like, see what you don't like, what works. But mostly doing things in advance, I think I would tell myself, do not leave anything to the last minute, especially when you're living in a different country and there are certain circumstances maybe that you're not used to or might have not considered or might be different from where you originally come from. Checking everything, asking questions, like I said previously, just in general, if you aren't sure of what you're doing in regards to any part of your student life in the UK, just ask somebody, because you can ask somebody at your institution, you can ask somebody in your students' union, at your accommodation, your friends, people who have been in the UK for longer than you have been. I think that's really important, just not depriving yourself of the opportunity of receiving support when you need it.
And I think it all comes back to sort of looking after our brains with this thing, because money and finance anxiety is a real thing. So using those resources, things like the British Council, very, very important, Catriona.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, your student experience in the UK is made up of a whole variety of academic, social, cultural, language experiences, and in order to access all of those and get the full benefit of a UK degree, you know, you need to have a level of financial stability. And so the things that will help you achieve that are good planning. I guess also, you know, thinking about things like currency fluctuations, because that's quite a distinct challenge for international students. You know, your UK fees and prices are fixed, but because you're working from a different currency, you've got to be mindful of that. But look, you know, for the majority of students, good planning, accessing support, as Arya said, you know, if you find that you are struggling a little bit or you're not planning things well, lots of people can help you get back on track. And picking up part-time work or even summer work, actually, you know, holiday work can really help bolster your finances and just allow you to be in a good place to access all of those great experiences that you've come to the UK for.
And also, can I add one thing to that? Before you come to the UK, it would be good, not just for students, just in general, but if you have, let's say, an emergency fund. So if you find yourself in a difficult position financially at any moment, having a certain amount of money set aside that you can sort of reach out to at any given moment, because things happen and we can't plan everything, and sometimes there are unexpected circumstances. So it's good to plan ahead with those things as well, so that you aren't as stressed when you come here and then maybe you encounter yourself with that kind of situation.
I was going to say, that's what's known as a rainy day fund over here in the UK. Is that a thing? I don't know. Is that a thing just in the UK, or is it just because it rains here all the time?
Yeah.
Maybe?
That makes sense, probably.
Yeah.
Good stuff. I feel like we covered a lot there. Thank you very much indeed, team. I enjoyed that very much indeed. Catriona, thank you as always for your help and expertise.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Brilliant to have you on. And Arya, good luck with the rest of your degree. You are welcome back on the podcast if you bring your cello.
Okay.
Okay? Is
I
that a
will
deal?
definitely. That's a deal.
Excellent. Good stuff. Well, I hope that was helpful for you. Don't forget, loads of other resources available on budgeting, scholarships, etc., all by heading to ucas.com/international. You can like and subscribe to this series, of course, on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Whole host of resources available, and we'll speak soon.